It's an amazing thought, really beautiful, nourishing thought and legacy, the gift that we received from Rudolf Steiner, that we know that that which is out there in the Father's world, above in the heavens, constitute us, is reflected and incarnated in the human body, in the form, eternal form of the human being. This is a knowledge that was an esoteric knowledge in the past, of course, that certain parts of our being are formed from the same domicles, parts of the zodiac that we know as constellations. So the heart, for instance, is formed by and from the forces of the constellation of Leo, lion. The chest, the rib cage, where that heart, when that lion is actually captured, is created, formed in us out of the forces, etheric life forces, spiritual forces of the constellation of Crab. Everything that has to do with human beings' duality, everything that has to do with our symmetry, which begins here in the shoulders, goes all the way to the hands and legs, is sponsored by the constellation of the Gemini, the cosmic twins. Symmetry of the human being. Everything that has to do with the organ of speech, the cosmic word that formed our speech apparatus, that our thoughts or our feelings, our will can be expressed in words, came and comes always from the constellation of Taurus, or you can say the spiritual sun, the Logos, the Christ, the creative forces of the hierarchies, permeating the constellation of Taurus, creates in the embryonal state and always ever after the apparatus of speech here. This is the neck of the human being. And then the head, the crown of our being, is shaped and formed together with our ability to think, but also to perceive, is shaped from the powers and forces of the constellation of Aries, the cosmic ram. Now here on the level of, this is shoulders, imagine, on the level of our digestive system and tract, that's where the mystery of transubstantiation of matter, of external world, and turning it into human being, so we can think, feel, and act, walk, dance, and so on, is taking place in the constellation of Virgin. In fact, this of course extends in women all the way to the mystery of the womb. Here, finally, on the level of your hips, is a part of the human being which is created by the forces represented or active in the constellation of the scales, Libra, the balance. From here to here, we are higher human being. Our standing position, our walking, our freedom of our hands even, is supported based on the scales. Michael also related to that. And right below that part is the most divine and yet the most fallen part of the human being. Fallen meaning most spiritual and in the highest degree immersed in the world of matter, in the world of astrality, in the element of earth, is the constellation of Scorpio, the procreative part of our humanity. So when you look at this, that threshold here, the upper man, the higher man, it's with this threshold between the scales and the Scorpio when a human being becomes really immersed in matter more and more. In the past, not so long ago even, in the medieval times when the Rosicrucians, the alchemists, spoke about this, this sign was very often associated with another being, with another name. Namely, people would not always speak of Scorpion there where the sun is in November today, but of eagle. I'm going to represent it in this form. And when you, for instance, look into the occult science, neuroscience, occult science, he speaks that the entire universe emerged out of the part of the spiritual cosmos which is known as eagle, today known as Scorpio. Something that was the highest spirituality, highest divinity, is represented by the symbol of eagle. In the fallen form, in the sick form, is represented by the symbol of Scorpion. There is an incredible mystery behind this part of the human being. And of course, not only do we exist as two separated streams within humanity, male and female, man and woman, from the beginning of Adam and Eve and the fall, in a certain sense, all our will, or our ambition, all our creativity, all our impulses, in a way, are concentrated or stream out of this place of the zodiac of the human body, the drive. Sagittarius is that part of our body all the way to the knees, and also in the higher part of the body, the arms. And then Capricorn, all those places where we are very stubborn or bony, particularly elbows and knees, which in some esoteric traditions are so-called black chakras. And finally, the forearm and calf. Aquarius, the water bearer, the bearer of the future, and the human being in its most creative part of our body is Pisces. But also, one can say at the same time, according to this statement that Pisces is such a dichotomy, the most cursed of all members of our body today. Why? Because our hands can create and shape, but they can also murder and steal. This part of the cosmic human being, that Scorpio, is also, out of all these zodiac signs and constellation signs, the one that is subject to the most acute and profound transformation. I already indicated that by this dichotomy between Scorpio and Eagle. In the past, people knew that there is a third one that is, in a certain sense, a midpoint between the highest and the lowest, and that is the snake. Ever since the Egyptian inscription on their temples, through all the time when human beings cultivated the mystery knowledge, these three, Scorpio, snake, and eagle, were considered three stages, not only of the decline of the human being into the world of matter, but also ability to lift ourselves up through the initiation, through our moral work. Just like the eagle fell through the stage of the snake in paradise into the dichotomy of the human being, so also through spiritual work, through transformation of our members, we may lift ourselves up out of the necessities of of the lower world into the heights of ego, or we can fall lower. This is our freedom too in our days, as long as we know about it. I mentioned that the last time, I'm going to come back to it very shortly, the story of the rich young man. All three synoptical gospels speak of this meeting of the rich young man. John does not mention anything about it. The synoptics don't speak anything about Lazarus. John, in turn, speaks of Lazarus. So there is a compositional connection between the meeting of the rich young man, his crisis, and mystical death and the rising of Lazarus. Remember the story? Good teacher, what must I do to achieve the perception of the spiritual world? And Christ says to him, follow the Decalogue, follow the law of Moses. Astonishing statement. By which we know that by following moral laws, that of Moses, the Decalogue, or even the Noahidian laws, we are becoming better human beings. In fact, they are expression of whole human beings. Do not steal, don't kill, don't sleep around. Just 3 out of 10. And this young man says, all this I have done since I was very young. You have a feeling that he's not just an ordinary person. He's been working hard on himself. And Jesus looks at him and he says, there's one more thing lacking. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor and then follow me. And the next thing follows, this man was extremely sad. So says the gospel. Why? Because he was very rich. We know that from the golden legend, Legenda Aurea, that Lazarus, together with his sister, were descendants of an aristocracy, Jewish aristocracy. They were incredibly affluent people. Mary Magdalene was having her party time most of the time. Very expressive, very artistic, very free, also very scorpionic type. Whereas her brother, Lazarus, was this young idealist who followed the path of knowledge, follow the God's way. He goes into crisis because he has so much. But of course, we should not only understand material property in terms of money. Everything that we have, even our talents, can be understood through that. Give it all and follow me. Peter is in shock when he hears us. We left our daughters and mothers and we left everything for you. But who can be saved if this is your criteria? He says to Jesus. And Jesus says, what is impossible to the human being is possible for the divine power slumbering within you. Nothing else is mentioned in the synoptics. John chapter 11, the raising of Lazarus. There is a connection that connects these two, and it's the word agape. One of 3 synoptical gospels. Mark says that the moment when this young man was so sad, his process of falling into depression has begun. Jesus looked at him with love, and that love that is mentioned by Mark is agape, which is the key word behind the Gospel of John. The disciple whom Jesus loved in Greek includes that word agape. Selfless love. This process of emptying yourself from yourself, as depicted by the synoptics, which leads Lazarus into the moment of death of his eye and complete transformation through Christ's resurrection on the way of his initiation, of his rising from the grave, is something that Judas was not given, was not able to do. Perhaps one can even say it wasn't for him. Both highly scorpionic types, as a mystai of Christ, both in a certain sense on the level of the snake. One being able to leave that snake and opening himself to the level of the eagle, the level of, one can say also the dove, John Lazarus. The other who, from the level of the initiate of Christ, falling even deeper than our lower nature. The type of situations that we are today witnessing in the world around us, perhaps even in us, is the beginning of, so to speak, device and proof that this is also a possible destiny of the human being. That we may fall even deeper than according to the divine plan. The beginning of the apocalypse which opens the way to the great division of the human being in the next cosmic epoch. Chapter 13 of the Gospel of John, this displacement of one of the 12 with the new one of the 12, but also chapter 13 of the book of Apocalypse. Chapter 13 of the book of Revelation is the moment when the humanity becomes aware of that other destiny of the human being, where the beast is revealed through the eye of the seer, John. This is chapter 13 of Revelations, verse 18. Here wisdom itself speaks. Whoever has the ability to think it, let him seek the meaning of the number of the beast, because it is the number of the human being. And its number is 666. The question of evil becomes very, very different when we stop thinking abstractly about it, but thinking this is actually the destiny of the human being to challenge this in ourselves. To go to death and resurrection with Christ, or to be cast out into the darkness together with Judas. One quote from Rudolf Steiner from the lectures where he speaks about the mystery of the human double, namely the situation whereby as we live, as we are born, as we know ourselves, going through day and night, there's of course just a certain amount of ourselves that we know. And that, I mean, also all the way to the organic composition. If I want to know how my liver functions, I have to read the book about it. I don't have an insight to it directly. So there's a part of me that is conscious, part of everyone that is conscious, and a vast part of our being that is unconscious, or subconscious rather, the science says. And in that part of our being, this is the quote, we arrive in this world with the garment of our organism without being able to reach down into it with our soul consciousness to any great extent. Instead, shortly before we are born, not very long before we are born, there is also an opportunity for another spiritual being apart from our soul to take possession of our body, namely of the subconscious part of our body. This is a fact. Shortly before we are born, another being indwells in us. In the terminology we use today, we would call this an Ahrimanic being. It is just as much in us as is our own soul. These beings lead their lives by making use of human beings to enable them to inhabit the sphere in which they wish to dwell, the earth. They have an exceptionally high degree of intelligence and a very significantly developed will, but no qualities of soul whatsoever. How are we to live with such knowledge? I make connection between Judas as a type in the Gospels and actually that being that inhabits the human being on earth. Just like Judas was always there without kind of biography, so this being, Steiner says, shortly before birth is already present in the human body. Now, it is so smart and so intelligent that mostly it assumes the position of our self, of our I. Unless we do work on self-knowledge and we exercise That law, the only commandment that Jesus gave to humanity after Judas was cast out on that night, little children, love one another. Only one commandment I leave with you, that you love one another. And you can hear it in the sacrament, you can hear it in the act of consecration. Pay attention to this next time. How many times in the ritual, in the sacrament, religious sacrament, Christian religious sacrament, the word sickness of sin comes in. That in me, which rests itself free from the load of sin, and in thinking and willing joins with you, for instance, or the body of Christ which you receive, the blood of Christ which enlivens you, may they penetrate you, so the sickness of sin be healed by the medicine that makes whole, the sacrament. The man's adversary. I take the cup and do so in the name of the Lord, calling, O Christ, I confess unto that which is revealed through you, the might of man's adversary you take from me. The adversary is not necessarily outside of me. It is something integral to my being. But in order to be able to wrestle with it, wrestle with myself, to humanize Judas in me, I need to turn to the sacrament. I need to turn to Christ. Not only as I, but as a member of this community.